How to evaluate elite fantasy running backs and their playoff schedule. Who has the weakest, who has the strongest? Let's get into it. If you haven't already, make sure to check out part one where I go into Robinson, Gibbs, and Chase Brown. But here we'll look at Saquon's playoff schedule. Obviously, the RB1 this season, look at that crazy 46 fantasy point game against the Rams. He's had a bunch of them, 33, 33, 26, 30. There's a 32, another 33, a 46. But let's look at the playoff schedule specifically because, again, you should not be playing in Week 18. It should be Week 15 quarterfinal, Week 16 semifinal, Week 17 final. Now, the Eagles, the only downside in that Week 17 matchup, because it's looking tantalizing, 30th ranked run defense in Dallas, and obviously he's the RB1, the best running back in the National Football League this season. Dallas, if he plays in that game, if the Eagles haven't locked up a playoff spot or whatever, if they're still chasing the 1 seed with Detroit, he's going to have one of his best games all season against Dallas, 100%. We look, and even, I know he only got 8 fantasy points in that game right there. I'm taking that out. I don't care. That's one game. It's a rivalry matchup, whatever. The Eagles were off their game in that matchup, okay? Dallas is still 30th against the run and have given up a boatload of fantasy points to opposing running backs in recent games. You'll see it again with Chase Brown this weekend. So Saquon's good in that championship matchup, and he's been great all season getting you to this point. Week 15 against Pittsburgh is a little tough, okay? Pittsburgh has a really good run defense. They have a good defense overall. It's going to be tough for Saquon to eclipse the 25 fantasy point marker in that game. It's going to be contingent upon touchdowns. And I don't think Philadelphia gets in the red zone much in that contest. So that's tough. Washington is a little worse against the run, right? So that's a pretty good matchup for Saquon Barkley. They can control that game with the running game, and he should ball out in the semifinals and finals. But the quarterfinal matchup is the one that if I'm a Saquon fantasy manager, I'm like, okay, maybe this isn't his best game, and perhaps some other players on my fantasy team can, carry me that week. Next, let's look at Kyren Williams. All right, so he plays San Francisco Week 15, 15th ranked run defense, but they were 8th before Bosa got hurt. So the last 2 weeks, they've given up like 200 rushing yards to James Cook and Josh Jacobs, so that's why they look so bad. If Bosa plays in this game, that's a tough matchup for Kyren Williams. It's also a rivalry, and Shanahan already lost the first matchup between McVay. So even if the Niners aren't competing, it's not like he's just going to lay down and lose that game, right? Jets, look, not the greatest run defense, but also not the worst. So that's not an easy matchup by any means. He is a touchdown machine, but that quarterfinal, semifinal matchup isn't great for Kyren. In Week 17 in Arizona, I do like a lot for Kyren Williams. So if you make it to the championship game, he should have one of his best games all season against Arizona, in my opinion. Next, let's go into Derrick Henry. So Derrick Henry obviously started out the season super strong, that 30 fantasy point, 35 fantasy point, then 2 weeks later, 25, 25 again, then 26. Few weeks in a row with no touchdown, so it's been a little concerning, you could say, as fantasy manager for Derrick Henry. But I do love Week 15 in the New York Giants. Easy matchup. Bottom 5 run defense. He should dominate that performance, right? Week 16 against Pittsburgh's a little tougher. We see what he did against Pittsburgh the first time out. 10.5 fantasy points, not great. That's going to be a struggle in the semifinals. In Houston, it's not like an easy matchup, but it's also not like extremely difficult. But he's going to be touchdown reliant like he was earlier on in the season where you see that 1-1, 2-2, 1-1. And then once the touchdown stopped a little bit, you saw that, fantasy points kind of decrease because he doesn't catch a lot of passes. I don't think he has the easiest fantasy football schedule, but he certainly doesn't have the toughest. Next, let's look at Joe Mixon. Miami in Week 15, top 10 run defense, not an elite matchup for Joe Mixon by any means. He has one of the toughest playoff schedule is Joe Mixon because top 10 defense in Week 15 in the quarterfinals, top 10 defense in Week 16 in the semifinals in Kansas City, in top 10 defense in Week 17 against Baltimore. So Joe Mixon fantasy managers, pray those last 3 weeks if you're in the quarterfinal, semifinal, and finals. Lastly, we'll look at Devon Achane. All right, so he plays Houston in Week 15, not an elite matchup by any means. San Francisco's hit or miss, and Cleveland is a really bad run defense. So Devon Achane, because of his pass catching upside, I really rely on him. I think he's going to have 20-plus fantasy points, probably 2 out of these 3 games, and one of them is going to be a dud, like a 10 to 15 fantasy point game. Hopefully, the rest of your team can step up during that time. Let me know what you guys think in the comments. Make sure to follow me for more fantasy football content and analysis like this.